What is James' Latin name? Justus. The defeated character is someone called Justus Barsabbas, whom we never hear from again. Are you gentlemen coming in?
How you doing today, sir? What's the speech about? You looking at it? I've just passed through the library and I heard you speaking, so I thought I had to stop all by. I guess I don't get an answer on that one. All right.
Peace.
Welcome to committee. Okay. What's that speech conversation about?
It's about
James, the brother of Jesus. All right, what James had to do with his Jesus? All right, I'll step on up. I don't want to speech or anything.
Pardon me, people like that worry me. And you understand why. Look, we're not trying to hurt anyone's feelings here. What we're trying to do is to resurrect people from the oblivion they have been cast into in history. We're not hurting anything that Christianity has to say, because we're taking a brother of Jesus and bringing him back into life. You know, I think if Jesus were alive today and things were said and done in his name that were not his, he would want us to know that. There are statements said. There are wolf in sheep's clothing who are coming to deceive the flock. There are all kinds of polemical statements of that kind. So I think that if there were problems, and I think after the Holocaust, he would expect us to do this. If these things contributed to the Holocaust, and I'm going to show you some things that did contribute to the Holocaust, the mindset that caused that is fed into people's minds generation after generation as holy writ, as truth, when in fact a lot of people who believe in these things are embarrassed by those things themselves and would like a way out. I give a way out. Who? The closest person to Jesus, his successor, his closest living heir, his actual heir in Palestine, if not elsewhere. You know, at the end of my book, someone said in one review from the Jerusalem Post, Eisenman's conclusion is apocalyptic. That is, who and whatever, if you're looking for the historical Jesus, basically you need to search for the historical James. The Pseudo-Clementines say, and this is a statement attributed to Jesus, be like good money changers, able to tell false coin from true. I say if you're looking for the historical Jesus, you should look for the historical James. And who and whatever James was, so Jesus would also be. I'll come back to the Judas Iscariot thing in a moment, but since we're on the James thing, let me just tell you one quick point which is so moving and touching about James. From our other source I haven't even got into, I've done all the negatives. James was a vegetarian. I think because he kept the extreme purity regime of the Qumran community and then some. James was a Nazirite from his mother's womb. There's nothing of this that's offensive to any of us. All of us want to be holy. There are many of these things that are very sympathetic to us. So how do you know these things? James is the most documented person outside of the Bible of anybody in the New Testament. We have more extra biblical material about James than any other character, including Peter, including John the Baptist. The only one who compares with James for extra biblical material about him, you know, James is in the Nag Hammadi materials. The only one who compares is John the Baptist. We have a long testimony to John the Baptist where? In the Antiquities, in Josephus. But other than that, we don't have a lot of testimony to these people. Peter, we have very little about. Now, I will tell you something about Peter in a moment. All of these people, John the Baptist included. John is a vegetarian, you know, according to the Gospel of Luke. John was holy from his mother's womb, just like James was, that is, a lifelong Nazirite. These people, according to the Pseudo-Clementines, whether right or wrong, you'll have to go to the Pseudo-Clementines and weigh them and see if they have anything in them. They're novels, true, but so the material we have is novelized. You have to compare one with the other, be like good money changers. But the characters that emerge are very sympathetic. Look, Peter, according to the Pseudo-Clementines, like James, is a vegetarian. You know, I have a dedication in this book, a quote from the Pseudo-Clementine homilies, which quotes Peter preaching things we don't even have in Acts. And these are very old sources. They may not be as old as some of our other sources, but they're very old. Here is Peter, Pseudo-Clementine homilies. Our Lord and prophet who has sent us declared to us that the evil one, having disputed with him 40 days, but failing to prevail against him, promised he would send apostles from among his subjects to deceive them. Therefore, above all, remember to shun. This is where I bring up, remember I mentioned to the community rule? And Josephus' Essenes too, they shun backsliders. They curse backsliders. But anyway, let's go on here. Therefore, remember to shun any apostle, teacher, or prophet who does not accurately compare his teaching with that of James, the brother of my Lord, and this even if he comes to you with recommendations. Pseudo-Clementine's homilies, 1135, Peter preaching at Tripoli. How many have heard that? Nobody. Nobody. Well, a few of us have, but the reason is these are the excluded materials. But some of these materials have pearls of wisdom, and if we don't know about the historicity, you'll have to be the judge of that. You are the final ones who will make the decision after weighing the evidence. So we give you the evidence, you decide, but look at the Peter that emerges in the Pseudo-Clementines. He's a daily bather, he's a vegetarian, he wears threadbare clothes like the Essenes, he rises before dawn and prays every day. Now, we don't get any material like that in the book of Acts at all. You can collate the speeches in the book of Acts attributed to Peter, and basically they recapitulate Pauline doctrine. Particularly that the Jews killed all the prophets, and the Jews are stiff-necked and always disobeying the Lord, etc., etc., etc. There are 5 speeches, I have counted them, where Peter says that. Just like Stephen says. Some say exactly the same thing. So my conclusion is, as James was written out, as I told you, anti-Semitism was written in. So I don't think that we're doing a disservice to this material. I believe we're rescuing it from extreme things that you would not want on your conscience. And you would want to historically revive what you would want on your conscience. And we are bringing these people, Jesus included, back to life as extreme holy people. Also, to my way of thinking, part of the uprising against Rome. Let me go back to 2 other episodes, and then I'll finish up at least this presentation. We're talking about the election. So what do we have? A Judas Iscariot. Someone actually voiced it here. Judas Iscariot. Judas Iscariot. That's the closest word we have to it. Judas the Sicarii were the extreme form of zealotry. But you know, even I didn't know these things when I started writing, which is why it got so long. It turns out that in the 2nd century, the Romans saw all circumcisers as Sicarion.
Halleluja! Ist erstanden!
Wenn die jüdischen Zeitungen heute glauben, auf versteckte Drohungen und die nationalsozialistische Bewegung einschüchtern zu können, sie sollen sich hüten. Einmal wird unsere Geduld zu Ende sein und dann wird den Juden das freche Lügenmaul gestopft werden.
that's where it started. And I was getting a doctorate in theology and anti-Semitism, or even the Bible was not that much on my horizon at the moment. Then moving to the next one. In 1959, my superiors, I had no thing to do with this decision. They simply said, sure, you had 5 years of Greek and 5 years of Latin in boarding school in Ireland. You're going to be a professor. And I said, thank you very much. And off I went. So they sent me for 2 more years to the Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome from 59 to 61. And those were gorgeous years to be in Rome. Really, really, really. Don't look at that picture. That's much long after the time I was there. It was mostly Vespas and Lambrettas rather than Fiats at that time. But the important thing was, this was the years right before the Second Vatican Council, which was 1962 to 65. So I was in Rome, 59 to 61, at the Biblical Institute, when, as Wordsworth said, it was bliss in that dawn to be alive. So if you look at the next picture, next image, these are my professors. All Jesuits, of course, all priests, all Jesuits. Augustine Bea was late for class one morning in December of 59. He came late to class, and we heard the rumor he was made a cardinal. He was made a cardinal by John the 23rd to work on and lead the discussion in the Second Vatican Council on Catholicism and Judaism in terms of anti-Judaism. And this was kind of the first time they really registered with me. It wasn't there. It wasn't there in Ireland. It just wasn't growing up. But all of a sudden, your professor is talking about anti-Semitism. I think anti-Judaism probably was what he was talking about, because it's more anti-Judaism in the New Testament. My other 2 professors, Max Zerwig and Stanislas Lyonnais, German and French. Bea was German too, by the way. I graduated after 2 years. I was getting a licentiate or a master's again. I did it all backwards. I got a doctorate first, and then I got a master's. They were suspended from teaching. I graduated in June of 61. They were suspended from teaching in September of 61, and were only reinstated when the Second Vatican Council arrived. The whole place I was in, the Pontifical Biblical Institute, was just on a tightrope, actually, with terms of the Vatican. But this was the first time it began to register with me. There's something out there called Anti-Judaism, and it's not out there. It's in these texts we're studying with the Gospel theology, with Pauline theology. All right, moving to the next image. Here's what really did it for me. In 1960, right in the middle of when I was in Rome, my superiors in America were sending 40 people to a pilgrimage around Europe to Roman Catholic pilgrimage sites like Fatima in Portugal, Lourdes in France, where else? Lisieux. We even went to Monaco for Grace Kelly. She was like a kind of a Roman Catholic saint at the time. We stood outside the palace in Monaco quite deliberately and looked at the palace as part of her. But the important thing was, 1960 was the Passion Play at Oberammergau. And this became constitutive and generative for me ever after. Now, I was just going there as a chaplain with these 40 people. And it was just, look, my superiors were sending 40 people over. They didn't want to send a priest with them because that would be another airfare. I was in Rome, so they picked me up, said, get to Lisbon, meet these people, take them around Europe. 1960, I get to the Passion Play. You know the story. The people in this Bavarian village had, you can read it there for yourself, had vowed to enact the Passion Play every year on the centenary, at least, of 1634, and special other ones as well, of course, every decade on the decades. And it went on and on. So I was there in 1960 with my group. look, I don't want you to read too much back into it, but it was constitutive. I saw in 1960 exactly the same version. It was unchanged, that Adolf Hitler had seen, and really seen. He went to it in 1930, before he was chancellor, and 1934, after he was chancellor. And remember, this is in the Bavarian foothills. In 1934, Jesus and Mary were Nazi Party members and had to be cleared after the war. Cleared in quotation marks. But Judas, ironically, was anti-Nazi. So in 1960, here's what happened. First of all, I was very cold. I wasn't dressed. We were doing a great big loop a southern loop from Lisbon to Rome, to Oberammergau, and back to Paris. So I was really dressed in short sleeve shirt, and it was freezing in the Bavarian Alps. But I was cold for all the wrong reasons. In 1960, what really struck me, and I mean it struck me, I'm not reading it back into it. We went, let's say, from 8 o'clock to 12 o'clock. Then we had 2 hours for lunch. We opened that morning at 8 o'clock and everyone was shouting, "For Jesus, Hosanna, this is Palm Sunday." Great. We come back after lunch and they're all shouting, "Crucify him." Now, I knew the story. I really wasn't surprised. I knew the text, but something happened when I saw it as drama. It didn't make sense. What happened over lunch? We left for 2 hours and the whole crowd changed from screaming Hosanna to screaming crucify him. I knew there was something awfully wrong with that story, not just with Oberammergau. No, I couldn't just say, well, they got it all wrong, those Bavarian peasants, as it were. No, I knew there was something wrong with the story. And so if you could turn to the next one, please. I want to look at this. I went hunting on the web, and it's kind of extraordinary what you can find if you know what you're looking for. This is Hitler, Monday, August the 13th, 1934. Adolf Hitler attends the Oberammergau Passion Play. He's not just there, he's at the play. And this is taken from the Illustrator Beobachter. The Beobachter is German for the Observer. It's the Nazi Party magazine, the illustrated one. You can find them all on the web if you look long enough and keep going. So moving to the next one, you can see another one, a young woman giving Hitler flowers, everyone smiling in the background. He's going to the play. And what I'm interested in, of course, is the contact between Oberammergau and anti-Semitism. So moving to the next one. This sort of fascinates me. I ran into this on the internet as well. Gottfried, and his affectionate shorthand, Friedel Lang. You can see his dates. He actually was there. He described Hitler attending Oberammergau in 1934. You can see he was quite young, born in 1919. He was the sixth last child of Mathilda and Anton Lang. Anton Lang is famous for being the Christ in 1900, 1910, 1922, postponed, I would imagine, for the Great Flu from 1920, and he read the prologue in 1930 and 34. But his last son, got out of Germany in 37, and you can tell he was wise to do it because his attitude was not exactly Nazi. So he left for Canada in 1937. This is a 38 photo showing him studying radio. He became an Arctic missionary pilot and later a professor of anthropology at University of Colorado in Boulder. Now, I'm showing this picture because of the next slide, which is his report on Hitler, verbatim. Hitler actually sat through the whole performance, lasting, yep, I saw it, from 8 to noon, 2 to 6. I think it's probably down to maybe 6 hours now, but it was 8 in those days. I was told that Hitler was impressed by the play. Friedel was outside handing out programs, so he wasn't inside in the theater. Promised to see that it would always be performed according to the ancient vow. He shook hands with all the principal actors up on the stage, including my father, Anton Lang, who then played the role of prologue reader. Here's some irony. The only major actor who refused to come on the stage was Caiaphas, who was Friedel's maternal uncle. So that leads me in to the next slide, next image. This is taken from the evening talk, non-stop talk, of Hitler on the Berghof, Obersalzberg in 1936. It's from the Bavarian National Library in Munich, and it's recorded in 1942. The picture is from 36. The recording is from people who were there, of course, writing what he said. I think it's worth reading. It's horrible. One of our most important tasks will be to save future generations and to maintain forever watchful in them a knowledge of the menace of Jewry. For this reason alone, it is vital that the Passion Play be continued at Oberammergau. For never has the menace of Jewry been so convincingly portrayed as in this presentation of what happened in the time of the Romans. There one sees in Pontius Pilate a Roman racially and intellectually so superior that he stands out like a firm, clean rock in the middle of the whole muck and mire of Jewry. And that's what Hitler had time to say in July of 42 when one of his armies, Army Group Central, was approaching Stalingrad. Moving now to the next one. The reason I'm fairly sure of what I thought happened to me at Oberammergau is because the first ever scholarly article I wrote says this, and it is discussing the crowd. It's discussing exactly that problem that I caught at Oberammergau. How could the crowd be all for him in the morning and all against him in the afternoon? What happened? Or are there two crowds, two different crowds? Anyway, if our theological anti-Semitism, be it conscious or unconscious, has throughout the ages fed the streams of political or economic, national or international anti-Semitism, the problem of its origins in the New Testament must be faced before its effects can be eradicated. Now, the title, Anti-Semitism and the Gospel, it's published in Theological Studies, a Jesuit magazine. In 1965, please believe me, that was not exactly the general discussion in the 1960s, Anti-Semitism and the Gospel. I do not mean I was alone, not for 1 second, but it was not exactly the major issues. And you can see my name. I was teaching that year at Iona University, just that 1 year. My name is my name in the order. John is my civil name, Dominic Crossan. Okay, so all of this is important for me because it confirms for me that I'm not just reading back into Oberammergau later knowledge. All right, moving to the next one. Now, I went to Oberammergau in 1960, of course, as a priest and the chaplain with a group. Sarah and I went back in the year 2000 just to see, because the text I'm quoting had been extensively revised and expanded. The text. Now, the trouble is, please, when you portray something on stage and screen, all sorts of funny things can happen that don't show up in the text. I mean, it's as simple as whether Caiaphas has a taller hat than Pilate. Whether Caiaphas, as he was in 2000, was carried in on the shoulders of a sedis gestatoria, like the Pope used to be carried. So anyone watching this would say, wow, this guy, whoever he is, I mean, I don't even know his name, but boy, he must be important by that other guy over there whose name if you're watching it, you're reading that Caiaphas is much more important, much more in charge than Pilate. I mean, funny stuff happens in drama. That's what I'm saying. Here's actually, I had the text ahead of time. I had studied it. I went to watch the changes. I had the German and the English with me, bilingual text. And I counted things. Now, what they're trying to do is make this a bit for not all the other Jews are against them. There's some for them, there's some against them. Fair enough. But if you bother to count named Jewish authorities, that would be names like, Caiaphas or Annas, they speak out for Jesus 24 times, but those against Jesus speak 84 times, if you bother to count. Before Pilate now, you have 4 crowds. This is 2000. A, B, C, D. They're called folks. And each of the leader of the crowds, the Volksführer, I kind of winced when I read that one, speak. The D crowd speaks for Jesus 5 times. Either A or B or C speak against him 49 times. It's really hard. Now, I don't know what happened in obviously there was no 2020 and 2022, but it's like a constant fight to clean up a text and to clean up a play instead of rethinking the whole thing, what happened historically, and then making a new play. It's like a constant damage control. Okay, moving to the next one. Again, here's what I want to hold in your mind. What happened to the crowd? What happened to the crowd? How come they were all for him and all against him? These were not, I obviously couldn't get any pictures when I was there. I didn't have a camera to begin with. Even in 2000, we couldn't take pictures. So these are all bought from Shutterstock. Look at the next one as well, please. Here's where you can see the crowd. These again are Shutterstocks. What happened during Passover week or during Oberammergau lunch, if you wanted? Look at the crowd on Palm Sunday. 9 o'clock in the morning, the whole stage, and it's a huge, giant, open to the air stage. You're sheltered, as you know, but the stage is open. It's filled with people. I wouldn't even want to try and count them. Heavily women and children, since the men are working. And then you look down at the same people, and you recognize the same people. You even see some of the kids, are the same kids. And of course, kids love to be on a stage shouting. So they love shouting Hosanna in the morning, and they love shouting crucify him in the afternoon. And you still have the question. Moving to the next one then. So here now, let's hold on to that and start raising some questions. A lot of this we will come back to, of course, in the 3rd lecture on the execution of Jesus, but it kind of pervades the whole attitude of which we go into it. That's obviously a shot of Mel Gibson. Again, one of the few ones you can get and use. It's from The Passion of the Christ of 2004. He is giving directions to his main actor. And just look at it, because in one sense, I'm using it as an image of what Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are doing. They're producing Jesus, as it were. So everyone is determining their own vision of here is Jesus as I see it. So I'm not putting that as sort of in any way to caricature Mel Gibson, but it raises the questions. So what I want to do now is to raise fundamental basic questions that should be there before you begin, not in cleanup afterwards. So you take this out, you take that out, and you don't do this and you don't do that. And it's a constant fight. So these are the questions. As you move from the gospel text, that's where I'm starting, by the way, to passion play, here are certain questions. And please be aware that these are questions from the text, in the text, if nobody had ever made a passion play or a passion movie. Moving then to the next one, Trip, please. Okay, here's my first question. Why this focus? Why emphasize the execution of Jesus in a passion play? Thereby diminished, that's a polite word, the preceding life or vision and the succeeding ascension or resurrection. Why focus just on that? A passion play. And by the way, this is a caution. The word passion comes from the Latin patior, which means to suffer or to endure. And I would emphasize endure. Martyrs, or Jesus, or John the Baptist as martyrs, didn't put the emphasis on the suffering. Of course, somebody who was crucified suffered. But the question was, were you willing to risk that? Our fixation with suffering is dangerously close to pornographic. We have to be very careful. Roman crucifixion was not about personal suffering. It wasn't like Rome said, now how can we really make this poor person suffer? If they wanted to do that, they'd have done something else. Roman crucifixion was public terrorism. We, Roman law and order, are going to do this as a warning. Don't act like this person has, or you will end up like this person did. Therefore, it required trained, expert torturers who would scourge a person to the point that the person would not be able to resist them on the way to the cross, but would still be alive to be put up on the cross. That took expert torturers, not just a band of soldiers. So Rome used this for public demonstrations, for warnings. It wasn't about suffering, though of course the person suffered. All right, moving to the next one. I mean, this came to me when I watched Mel Gibson's movie. I got to see it here in Orlando about a month before it came out. And I brought home this poster from it. I had the original of this poster. Look at what he's written down in white. Dying was his reason for living. Jesus came to die. It really wasn't too much important if he wandered around Galilee, kind of looking for an executioner or something. Jesus, dying was his reason for living. I would have said living was his reason for dying. But if you even look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, none of them simply told the death. All of them had life before and resurrection afterwards. So my first question is, what's this fixation? And I include in that walking into a church and seeing nothing there in front of you but a cross. What's this fixation? All right, moving now to the next one. Set another question. Here's a second question. And this will take up here most of the rest of the discussion. Literary mode. How do you distinguish in a passion play or movie between historical fact and apologetical or polemical fiction? How do you depict each accordingly? And what I'm going to do is do a kind of a case study. I want to do something now, but I'm not going to do exactly the same when we come to the third lecture on the execution. We do more. I want to ask, for example, is the Barabbas story history or parable? And by parable, I mean Markan parable, a parable from Mark, not from anyone else. Is it, in our best historical judgment, a piece of Roman history or Markan parable? Then moving to the next one, that's what I want to explore. For example, this is one of the few images that I could get. I was searching the web for images from the Passion of the Christ that I could use. Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. Most of them were close-ups of Jesus suffering. I was trying to find crowd scenes. I couldn't find them that I could use. But this is one I did find. This is the image, obviously, of Pilate in the middle with his right hand gesturing towards Jesus standing against himself. And over the other pillar is Barabbas, held by soldiers. So I want to ask, and watch how I try to decide, is this history or parable? And if it's parable, how are you going to handle it? So let's take a Look at the next one then. I'm going to break down that question to 4 sub-questions. Let's call them 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D. Here's question 2A. First of all, is an open Paschal amnesty credible? From anyone in charge anywhere in the whole world ever. Now, underline that word open. By open, I mean that a ruler, whoever that ruler is, says, I will give you whomever you want. Of course, rulers can grant an amnesty. Of course they can. Sometimes even presidents, before they leave, grant amnesty. But would anyone grant an open Paschal amnesty? You guys telling the people, whoever you want, you'll get out. Why would you do that? Wouldn't that make somebody commit an awful crime the day before to get out? Look what you have in Mark, though. At the festival, watch how it's kind of diminished. At the festival, he used to release a prisoner for them, anyone for whom they asked. Now, it's not the question of amnesty I'm talking about. It's open amnesty. Matthew has the same thing. Anyone whom they wanted, copying from Mark. Luke has a kind of a sort of knows, I don't quite know if I believe that. But he has the Barabbas story, but no open Paschal amnesty. And John simply says, you have a custom that I release someone for you. Nothing about whoever you want. So I think even within the 4 authors of the New Testament, that an open Paschal amnesty, is that possible? Second one. Next one, please. All right. Question 2B. Is a Paschal amnesty credible from Pilate? Even if you say somehow he's deciding it, what do we know about this guy Pilate? Okay, think about him. He ruled for 10 years rather than the usual 2 years. He must have hated his job. Stuck from a Roman point of view at the back of beyond, with, from the Roman point of view, a recalcitrant people for 10 years. And he wasn't even the full governor. He was subordinate to the legate level governor in Syria, kind of looking over his shoulder all the time. And eventually, well, we get to that. So how much do we know about him from both Philo and Josephus, about this Pilate guy? Okay, next one, please. Here's the famous image, of course, of him washing his hands. You can't wash your hands and then give your soldiers charge of it. I want to know what we know about the character of Pilate from Philo. And Philo, when you read him, you almost want to say, come on, nobody's that bad, Philo. But Philo chooses him as the model for a bad governor. Inflexible deposition, merciless, obstinate, corruption, insolence, rapine, insulting people, cruelty, continued murders of people untried and uncondemned. Grievous, he keeps going on and on and on, and then he repeats it again. Constantly repeated executions without trial. Caesar's a supreme, the 2 things he picks up are execution without trial. All right, this is good old Philo. He's not the Hamlet-like figure who just can't make up his mind. He's having such a rough day. All right, going to the next one, please. As you can see, that famous piece from Caesarea Maritima, dedicated by Pilate to the divine, this Tiberium, to the divine Augusti, plural, Tiberium, Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, dedicated. In the end, he was sent back to Rome. The Syrian legate level governor Vitellius removed him from his sacred office, and also removed, by the way, the high priest Joseph, named Caiaphas. So the 2 of them were kicked out of office at the same time. Maybe they had, in 36, maybe they had cooperated not wisely, but too well. And the reason given by Josephus is that he had gone against the Samaritans in arms, Josephus says. I would question that. If the Samaritans had taken up arms, it was his duty to go against them. I suspected that they were conducting an unarmed ritual action, and he used them as he did with some of the Jews as well, to go against them. And he was sent off to Rome to explain himself and disappears from history. So then moving to the next one. So we're moving to the next question. Okay, we've seen it's kind of really unlikely there ever was an open Paschal amnesty. And even from good old Pilate, I doubt if there ever was even an amnesty in the sense that I let out whoever I want. So, is Barabbas then factual history or fictional parable? Mark is the story's only source. I hear that very clearly. Matthew and Luke certainly copy him, adapt him. And John probably. We'll see that in a second. That's my judgment. So now the question becomes, did Mark invent it? And if so, for what authorial purpose? Why would you do that? What's he up to? So now the question is focusing down firmly on Mark. And going to the next one, please. So Mark is writing after the destruction of Jerusalem by the Roman legions in 70. Recall then Jesus' prophecies in chapter 13, where he's kind of exculpating Jesus from any responsibility for it. Mark wants to create a parable and retrojects it from the 70s to the 30s, in which the crowd, that's his term, is forced to choose between two modes of struggle. Mark wants you to imagine Pilate standing there with Jesus on one side, Barabbas on the other, and they have to make a choice. It's like, oh, Jerusalem, make your choice. It's the nonviolent resistance of Jesus, not just nonviolence. It's always nonviolent resistance for Jesus, because Romans didn't crucify people for nonviolence. They loved it. It's nonviolent resistance. So here you have the son of the divine father, and here you have the son of a human father, Barabbas. Not exactly the clearest name. It's like a Scandinavian called father-son. Not exactly a helpful name. So Mark is creating a parable. This is my historical judgment. And he's saying in the 70s, O Jerusalem, when you had a choice between two forms of resistance, the nonviolent resistance of Jesus, the violent resistance of Barabbas, you chose the wrong option. He's speaking to refugees, I think, from Jerusalem. Probably, I would say, around Caesarea Philippi. I don't think Mark was written in Rome. That's my judgment. And he's explaining to them the wrong choice. I think it's a parable as much as the Good Samaritan or the prodigal son, say, are parables of Jesus. And of course, they have data from their times. All right, so moving to the next one. Here's the final question. Does the crowd come for Barabbas or against Jesus? So the crowd that's all for him is one crowd, but does a crowd come up to get their guy Barabbas? Well, read Mark. Remember, Mark's the source. Everyone else is copying. Sacred plagiarism, if you'd like. At the festival, Pilate used to release a prisoner for them, anyone for whom they asked. We saw that. Now, a man called Barabbas was imprisoned with the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. He's a freedom fighter from the Jewish point of view. So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to his custom. Now, as I read that, the clear thing is Pilate, in Mark's story, Barabbas is in jail, and the crowd comes up to get him out. Now, for example, if Mr. Gibson had asked me to be his historical consultant, on the day he was filming this, I would have said, how are you going to decide how many people are in a crowd? You have to get your extras, and you have to decide, and you have to pay them all, so you have to make a judgment. All it says in the source is the crowd. Now, that depends on context. If you're dealing with a honeymoon, two's company, three's a crowd. If you're dealing with, say, the president signing a bill in the Oval Office and it says the crowd of senators pressed around the president, what are you thinking, 20, 25? Now, if you ask me as a historian, how many people would be in the crowd coming up before Pilate to ask for the freedom of a known rebel who had committed murder? I would say 6 to 8 to 10 is pushing it. Because Pilate might think, good, here's more of them. Grab them all. They're his friends. I think they'd come up, a small crowd, respectful, lots of bowing and scraping, and their hands out to show no hidden daggers or anything else. Surrounded, this would be not a crowd or a mob. Any depiction of a mob screaming at Pilate and Pilate succumbing to the mob is a deliberate making a farce out of Roman law and order, Roman justice. They're making it like in the theater where you could scream at even the emperor, put thumbs up or thumbs down. Pilate is not a hero in this. He's a buffoon, and he's not a Hamlet character. Moving to the next one. Here's what we have to face. I have those 4 emblems, those lovely emblems from Sagrada Familia. You can see they're written in Catalan. Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. Follow the money. No, follow the source. How many sources do we have? And I want you to think about this. For this passion story, wouldn't you think we'd have 4 versions? We have Mark. And certainly, from the scholarly point of view and my own viewpoint, he's copied into Matthew and Luke. It's like these 2 authors don't have any other data. Don't you have another alternative story? You got to follow Mark and make a few changes. And that raises the huge question then, is John, the final one, an independent source, which it is for some very good scholars, but I'm not convinced at all. I think we only have one tradition, the Markan tradition, for the Passion story. And therefore we have to ask very carefully, what is Mark doing? So, for example, turning to the next slide. Look at these changes. I'm just looking across Mark, Matthew, Luke, John. And you're asking, who is shouting against Jesus? Who is this? Okay, who's the X who come up for Barabbas? Look what Mark has. Mark consistently says the crowd. It's achlos, singular in Greek. The crowd, the crowd, the crowd. That's Mark. Now watch what Matthew does to that. He talks about the crowds. I don't know how many he said the crowds, but it's bigger than the crowd, I presume. Second time he says the crowd, same as Mark. Then he all of a sudden expands it to the people as a whole. Pas, ha, laos in Greek. And laos in Greek is people in the sense of we the people. It's the people. It's not just, the people coming out of a shop or something. It's the nation almost. So that's Matthew. I don't see that as a separate tradition. I see that as Matthew changing. Now Luke, once again, has the crowds. So he changes Mark. And then he goes to the people. Luke expands it again. And when you get to John, it's the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. Now you have to watch what's happening before your eyes. It's moving across from Mark through Matthew and Luke to John in ever widening, expansive circles, as it were, of responsibility. So moving to the next one. All of this, that by the way is from the other side of Sagrada Familia, the Passion portal, where everything is kind of heavy, stone. You see Christ there, and in the corner in the right-hand side is Pilate. He's not quite washing his hands, but he's kind of mourning over what he has to do. Okay, I'm using today as preparatory historical therapy, and I'm not saying that, please, for the audience. It's for myself, because it started in 1960 and it's never lit up. It's preparatory historical therapy, because when you're talking history about this, it's not like talking history about, say, the Homer or the war against Troy. This is fraught. To avoid prejudices of anti-Judaism or anti-Semitism in any reconstruction of the historical Jesus, I have two things I want to hold always in our mind. Moving to the next slide. Here's the first one. This is from Josephus in Jewish Antiquities. I don't think you'll ever get a more succinctly accurate summary of what happened. Pilate, upon hearing him accused by men of the highest standing, proton andron is the Greek, amongst us, these would be the high priestly families, condemned him to be crucified. Accused to Pilate. Pilate only Pilate could crucify, or condemn to death for that matter. People could, high priests could make an accusation, and you don't have to demonize them. Caiaphas was a quisling in plain language. At his very best, he mediated between his people and the Roman authorities. At his worst, he simply betrayed his people to them. Looking at the next slide, this is the second thing you must hold on to. The high priests of Jerusalem's temple, and especially the 7 from the family of Annas, were neither popular with nor representative of the people as a whole. They just weren't. This is Josephus, by the way. The 4 families were official collaborators under direct Roman occupation. That's what they were. At their best, they mediated between their people and the occupiers. At their worst, they collaborated fully with the occupation to the detriment of their people. But if you look at the next slide, in any case, here's what we know about them. The Sicarii, the high priests, and urban terrorism. The hidden dagger assassins, or Sicarii, at festivals, mingled with the crowd, stabbed their enemies. Who are their enemies? First, Jonathan the high priest. And here's the description of Josephus from terrorism itself. The panic created was more alarming than the calamity itself. They were not trying to terrorize people. They were assassinating priestly collaborators. That's what they were doing. In the crowds, at festivals, they were using daggers to assassinate high priestly collaborators with Rome. Also the zealots, the high priests, and regime change. When armed peasant bands were forced inside Jerusalem as Vespasian's net came southward and pulled them all inside besieged Jerusalem, they summoned one of the priestly clans and cast lots for a high priest. So let God choose it. And they chose a village priest, not one of the aristocratic high priests. So yes, the high priests accused Jesus before Pilate, who crucified him. And the high priest did not, from everything we can tell from Josephus, who was himself a priest, of course, and high in the priesthood, represent the people. So now if you could look at the closing image. Okay. You know, I spent 2 years at the French School of Archaeology in Jerusalem, 65 to 67. And this is the only picture I have from those 2 years. In the fall of 65, soon after we got there in October of 65, we spent a couple of weeks around the Dead Sea. Our base was in Jericho at the time, in a hotel in Jericho. And I'm wearing a keffiyeh. I already have a beard, by the way. And I'm wearing a keffiyeh not because I thought it was cute or anything else, but because it was blazing hot and they're remarkably cool because they catch a breeze. And a lot of us were wearing them for the 2 weeks in the desert. But I'm standing on the earthquake fissure at Qumran. My 2 feet, my left foot and my right foot in the picture, small picture, are on the same actual step. It just torqued, as it were, like that. And I looked absolutely villainous. I'd been working on a beard for quite a few months. I don't think you'd buy a used camel from that guy. But here's the point. Studying anti-Semitism in the Gospels on the death of Jesus during the 60s led me to focus on the historical Jesus in and since the 1970s. That's what got me into it. I didn't start with the historical Jesus. I started with the problem of anti-Judaism or anti-Semitism as a seedbed in the Gospels. And then from that, the 60s, it led kind of more and more about Jesus. But I think it has been what would you call it, like a substratum all throughout my work on the historical Jesus. Watch very carefully for anti-Judaism or anti-Semitism in the New Testament.
Jesus' ministry, as we call it now, no matter how we construe it, no matter what kind of theological articulation we give it, was at least historically on a collision course with Roman hegemony in the region.